High-profile cases of alleged police misconduct and brutality in places like Ferguson, New York, and Baltimore has ignited a national conversation about how our streets are being policed. But is that only the tip of the iceberg? In a thought-provoking new book, Adam Benforado contends that our whole legal system is flawed far beyond what the general public perceives. He's a graduate of Harvard Law. He's professor of law at Drexel University and is the author of Unfair, the New Science of Criminal Justice. Adam joins us from Philadelphia. What's unfair, Adam?
So the book is about the hidden forces that shape the behavior of detectives and jurors and judges and witnesses and others in our criminal justice system. And in each chapter, I take up a different one of these characters, and I contrast the conventional stories we tell about how these people make decisions and where things can go wrong with what the latest evidence from psychology and neuroscience has to say.
Do you have training in psychology and neuroscience?
So I started working in this field in law school. Started working with a man named John Hansen, who runs the Project on Law and Mind Sciences. And then when I became a professor, I started actually collaborating with actual psychologists on experimental projects. And so my big collaborator is a cognitive psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania.
And is racism, or do you have a better term, is at the bottom of all of this?
Well, I think when we look at the recent incidents that we've seen around the country, our natural inclination is to believe that our police forces are still filled with bigots and that these recent tragedies have racial animus at their heart. Now, I think what the research from psychology would suggest is that the more likely culprit is implicit racial bias, the notion that police officers have to make automatic decisions like whether to draw their weapon or how to react to a suspect who's seems somewhat belligerent, and that in these circumstances they rely on automatic knowledge structures, things like stereotypes. And there are a lot of very damaging stereotypes that involve young African Americans, in particular the link between blackness and crime or violence. And so in these heated moments, police officers may make decisions, even though they consider themselves to be completely egalitarian, completely not racist at all. They may act in ways that have a disparate impact on people of color.
Are you saying it's in the DNA?
I'm not saying it's in the DNA necessarily. I'm saying that it's a result of pervasive, damaging stereotypes which have existed in our culture for decades. So these things come from actually television programs on primetime that depict African-American young men in a certain way. It comes from the 5 o'clock news shows, which, you know, in Philadelphia, every night there's another story about a young African-American and a criminal act. And I think these things sort of engender these powerful links that then affect our behavior when we've got to make quick decisions in the moment.
So in a courtroom, is there kind of an automatic bias if the defendant has a beard or is black, as opposed to an attractive-looking white lady?
So we know that a lot of outcomes in our criminal justice system are determined by things that shouldn't matter at all. And one of those things that shouldn't matter is the appearance of a person. So there's good research that suggests that more attractive witnesses are more likely to be believed. We have research that suggests that African Americans, people are judged based on the color of their skin. It's not just that they're more likely to get the death penalty, it's also how black they are. So people with more stereotypically African American features, wider noses, thicker lips, darker skin, they are even more likely to receive the death penalty. So there are a lot of problems that have to do with how we sum people up just based on the way they look.
Well, like a lady changes lanes, is pulled over, is taken from a car, told to stop smoking, commits suicide. That might not have happened if that were a white, attractive young lady.
I think it almost definitely would not have happened at all. And that recent incident involving Sandra Bland, I think the problem there is actually much wider. One of the things that concerns me is actually the use of videotape evidence. Recently, we've been thinking about videotape evidence as sort of this cure-all for our system. We need to attach more video cameras to police officers in the field. We need more squad car cameras. And I think that the research suggests that that can be beneficial in sometimes encouraging police officers to follow the law, to be more cautious. But we have to always remember that cameras offer a particular perspective. They don't just offer an objective viewpoint. So interesting research in the interrogation context suggests that it really matters where the camera angle is placed. So in an interrogation, if we place the camera behind the interrogator versus behind the suspect, we're going to view things in a way that's more supportive of what the interrogator has done. When we're looking at things through the eyes of the person being interrogated, we're a lot more likely to appreciate the coercive things that are going on. And so that's one of my concerns with all of these squad car cameras, with lapel cameras, is that we're going to be biasing things in favor of the police.
This is a fascinating subject. Great book. Common police practices encourage false identification of suspects? How?
I think that's true. So, you know, there are a lot of things that are not in control of the police department. So we know that making cross-race identifications are far more difficult. People tend to be far less accurate. We know that people who have observed suspects at night or at dusk are far less accurate than those who have observed events at midday. But there's a lot of things that's in control of our police departments, and there are a lot of procedures that need to be changed right now. One of them is the use of the show-up. So imagine there's a bank robbery. Sometimes the police may simply bring a witness by the crime scene. There's a guy sitting on the curb, handcuffed, and they may say, well, do you see the person who robbed the bank? Now, that is highly suggestive. The reason that the police do it is it's very convenient. Oftentimes, they're concerned that maybe the real perpetrator is still out there. But it's really, really not a good way to determine whether someone actually committed the crime or not. What makes things worse is that oftentimes there are multiple identification procedures. So that person who was brought by the crime scene is then 2 weeks later brought in for lineup. And the question with that lineup identification is the person remembering the person who robbed the bank or that person that they saw on the street corner? Really, there's no way to know. What the research suggests is that memories are not the sort of rock-solid evidence that we believe that they are.
Is there also kind of a bias against younger people?
So I think that younger people, people with mental health issues, people with low IQs are vulnerable in our criminal justice system from investigation through adjudication and to incarceration. Now, if we're looking at the investigation period, I tend to worry particularly about interrogations. What we know is that the most commonly used procedure in the United States, what's referred to as the Reid technique, leaves these people at a particular disadvantage. So oftentimes the second part of this process is the classic good cop, bad cop, what's referred to as maximization and minimization, in which the suspect is under immense pressure, often for a period of hours. And we know that young people, people with mental illness, and people with low IQs tend to often think in this moment, well, I'm just going to confess. I'm experiencing this acute distress. I just need to relieve this. I know I'm innocent, and I'm sure that once I admit and can get out of this room, everything will work out. They'll check out other evidence, my alibis will check out. And the unfortunate thing is, as soon as you confess, the police stop looking for anyone else. They don't follow up on any of those other leads. And we know that through confirmation bias, with a confession, actually some of the seemingly most objective elements of our investigations, matching up fingerprints, matching up DNA, can actually be corrupted when the lab technicians know that you already confessed.
How, Adam, do we change all this?
Well, I think the first step, honestly, is to embrace evidence-based justice. We have evidence-based medicine. For many years in medicine, doctors made calls based on their gut instincts, based on anecdote, and those in charge finally decide, well, this is a really bad way to determine whether particular interventions, particular medicines are effective. We need to embrace the empirical method. Same thing has happened actually with business, but it hasn't happened to law. I think we blindly defer to those who came before us, thinking that they are somehow more enlightened, more pure-minded than we are. And even if that was true, they don't have access to the cutting-edge research that has come out in the last couple of decades in psychology and neuroscience.
Something troubling from your book. You say that women, not men, who are more conservative are more likely to let off an accused rapist than women who are liberal and younger. How do you explain that?
So I teach criminal law, and we spend a good portion of the course looking at the nuances between states when it comes to legal doctrine. And my casebook suggests that it matters immensely whether we're in a jurisdiction, for example, that recognizes a reasonably mistaken belief in consent, that ought to determine the outcome in a date rape case, for example. Now, researchers have looked at that and actually tested out when we change the law, how does that affect the outcome? What they found, the law does no work at all. It doesn't matter at all in this particular context. What matters are the particular backgrounds and experiences of the jurors. So the outcome of a trial could be determined before the trial even takes place, during voir dire. And in this particular context, the most interesting distinction between subgroups of citizens was not between men and women. It was actually within women. So conservative, older women who ascribe to more traditional gender norms were far more likely to let the defendant off than young, liberal women with more progressive gender values.
Wow. Do we study other systems around? Is there a very good criminal justice system in Sweden?
So the answer is that certain jurisdictions do things better. And that's not just, internationally, that's also in the United States. So when it comes to prosecutorial misconduct, I think Dallas does a better job than a lot of other jurisdictions because they've adopted a conviction integrity unit within the prosecutor's offices, which looks for mistakes that have been made, looks for the telltale signs of wrongful convictions. Internationally, I think when it comes to corrections, our correctional system, I think countries in Northern Europe are probably offering the best current model. In these countries, the focus is not on payback. In the United States, we're very focused on hurting those who have committed crimes in an attempt to somehow even the scales of justice. In these countries, the focus is really on repairing the damage and rehabilitating the individual so that the person can be a successful member of society. And I think that that's where we ought to look as there is this great momentum building in this country to reform our methods of punishment.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Adam.
It was a pleasure.
The book is Unfair, The New Science of Criminal Justice. It's out now, and it's available everywhere.